Hey everybody, welcome back for round 2. Starting out on the play is exactly where I want to be, even if my opening hand is a little mana flooded. But with an invasive 2-drop and a removal spell, I decide it's probably worth keeping. My opponent's turn 1 Insolent Neonate makes me a little nervous since it gives him the early momentum, but I feel quite a bit better when he sacks it just to draw a card on turn 2, allowing me to pull ahead on the board. Turn 3 gets a little awkward when he drops Fevered Visions and I'm sitting on 3 lands in my hand. I know I'm going to start taking damage from this enchantment if I can't dump my hand, which is pretty difficult when I'm limited to playing a single land per turn. At this point, I need to start drawing into spells so I can empty my hand and get the benefit from Fevered Visions without taking damage from it. I could just nuke it with Angelic Purge, but blue-red decks tend to be fairly creature-light, which leads me to believe I can probably race him if I can just clear his board, especially since I'll be drawing 2 cards per turn just like he will. This puts me in a tight spot if he draws into gas and I flood out, but it's a good enough gamble that I'm willing to take that chance. Unfortunately, approximately half my draws over the next few turns are land, forcing me to take damage from Fevered Visions turn after turn. I crack in over the next few turns with what creatures I have on board, trying to race him to the finish, but he manages to stick a Wolf of Devil's Breach, which tears apart my board with a single attack. Following up with the hasty Ember Eye Wolf puts me down to 2, and my attempts to draw into an answer leave me with nothing but more land for my trouble, so I concede the game. When I go to my sideboard, I consider bringing in Humble the Brute to deal with Wolf of Devil's Breach. but I go ahead and decide against it. I have 4 pieces of hard removal in my deck already, so the issue isn't drawing into an answer to deal with it. The issue is having the answer in my hand when the opponent plays it. I'm on the play in game 2, which makes my opening hand a questionable keep. I have Rattle Chains and Just the Wind for early game plays, but if I don't draw into any planes, I'm going to be in a bad position. But since I have more planes in my deck than islands, and because this is a very strong hand if I do get my planes, I decide to take the risk and keep it. I'm rewarded with the planes on my very next draw, and I get off to a quick start with Rattled Chains at the end of my opponent's turn, followed by Pious Evangel. With no follow-up play from my opponent, I decide to get aggressive and swing in with the team, holding up Just the Wind in case my opponent decides to get cute and try to blow me out by casting something to trigger his opponent's prowess. Since I have an out in case he has a trick, this is essentially a free attack for me. Even if I end up having to use my bounce spell, I can still build my board post-combat by playing one of my 1-drops. After creatures bounce, I decide to get my Gossip Monger online ASAP rather than digging for more cards with Thraben Inspector. On the turn after, running out the Inspector and Trueface Sensor feels better than just using all my mana to play and equip the equipment, since all I'll get out of it right now is an extra point of damage with my Rattle Chains. My opponent slams Geralf's Masterpiece once he hits 5 mana, and I know it's going to be a major roadblock, but he's sitting on enough cards in his hand that it's currently only a 3/3. I don't need to waste my removal spell on it just yet. When my opponent is tapped out, I can equip my Incited Rabble and crack in as a 3/4 Vigilance, which he can't profitably block without trading his flyer for it. Things get a little rougher when he follows up with Wolf of Devil's Breach, though. At this point, I have to decide whether it's worth blowing my Just the Wind to bounce his Wolf back to his hand, knowing I'll have to deal with it when he plays it again next turn, or if I should just use the mana to draw deeper into my deck and hope to draw more land, and use my Angelic Purge to kill it on my next turn. I also want to use my Angelic Purge to kill his Geralf's Masterpiece so he can't recur it, but I can't guarantee I'll draw into any of my other removal spells before the Wolf starts tearing apart my board. Ultimately, I decide the Wolf is more of an immediate threat than the Flyer, and I would much rather take care of it now while my opponent is tapped out. Of course, I give my opponent the option to trade one of his big beaters for my 1-drop before I do anything else. I get to eat a creature for free and follow up by killing his Wolf, In addition, I'm also able to keep up a couple mana to bounce Geralf's Masterpiece at the end of my opponent's turn. This sets me up perfectly to pass my next turn with 5 mana open so I can counter it with Confirmed Suspicions when he tries to replay it. He can still buy it back if he wants, but it'll cost him 3 cards and an extra turn for his trouble, while I get all the clue tokens I'll ever need to close out the game. The tempo loss for my opponent is too much to come back from, and it only takes another couple turns to close out the game. During my second sideboard, I consider how much work Confirmed Suspicions is really doing in this matchup. I managed to win a game with it in game 2, but it spent the first half of the game just rotting in my hand. Since I only really need to worry about the 2 bomby cards in my opponent's deck, and I have plenty of removal to deal with those, I decide that Strength of Arms will help me more against the smaller creatures than the clunky 5 mana counterspell will help me against his bombs. I'm on the draw for game 3, but my hand looks decent enough with 2-drop, 3-drop, and removal. I just have to hope my opponent didn't have a dual shot to sideboard into. My opponent gets out a turn 1 Insolent Neonate, and when he has nothing on turn 2, I decide to run out Daring Sleuth, figuring I'd be better off holding my Hanwehr Militia Captain so I can surprise him later with it. Unsurprisingly, he holds back his 1/1 to hold off my attack, but after seeing his emphasis on madness spells in the previous games, I decide his Neonate is worth more than my Sleuth and swing in to let him make the trade. Getting my Looter online puts me in a better spot if the game goes long, but Ravenous Bloodseeker with Ghostly Wings attached puts me in a bad spot. Not only does it make a great blocker for both ground and flying creatures, but he has a lot of reach, being able to crack in for up to 4 damage per turn while simultaneously building his board or tearing apart mine with madness cards. I can't even take care of it when he's tapped out because he can bounce a creature back to his hand at instant speed by discarding a card. Since the Bloodseeker is going to be difficult to deal with, I decide to ignore it for now and worry about building out my board instead. I begin working towards getting my Militia Captain online and flipped over the next couple turns, putting myself in a dangerous spot by taking even more damage from a hasty Grier Reach bait. I manage to stabilize at 7 life, and my gambit pays off, allowing me to flood the board with chump blockers both on the ground and in the air. At this point, my opponent hasn't played anything for a couple turns despite having 4 mana in play. I'd like to close the game out since I have the upper hand, but I don't want to accidentally play into a blowout. I know he has Just the Wind and Twins of Mara's State in his hand, and there's every chance he has other madness cards like Fiery Temper that I just haven't seen yet. Since I can't be sure that he isn't sitting on one of these cards, but I also don't want to give him the opportunity to draw his way out of the hole he's in, I decide to split the difference. I get rid of his only blocker, then swing in for enough damage that his only lines of play are to either kill or bounce my flyer, or to chump block my 6/6. I hold back a single spirit token and hold Rattle Chains in my hand for defensive redundancy. Having no way to avoid lethal, my opponent dumps his hand and concedes the match.